Something was wrong with the number, and Vex Cora felt it before he understood it. He had been staring at threat assessments for most of his adult life. Rows of figures, risk curves, behavioral projections, the kind of work that numbed instinct and rewarded trust in systems. You didn't survive 17 cycles in galactic admissions by questioning automation. You survived by letting it decide for you. Still, his respiratory slits tightened as the hologram hovered above his desk. Human third planet, Sol system. Threat rating 21. Harmless, practically ornamental. He should have moved on. He had 600 more applications before shift rotation, but there was a footnote, small, buried, the kind administrators were trained to skim past. Pending reclassification, under review. Vex hesitated. That was unusual but not actionable. Reviews took years. Committees argued. Species evolved faster than bureaucracy ever could. The number was still the number. He checked the routing code. Crimson Nexus Academy. Combat Division. That made no sense. Humans didn't qualify. They attended soft institutions, cultural exchanges, research fellowships, places where failure resulted in disappointment, not dismemberment. His manipulator hovered over the rejection stamp. Then he saw the submission date. 4 months old. Too late. Deadlines mattered more than logic. Rejecting now meant appeals, audits, personal review, years of corrective documentation that would follow him through departments and supervisors like a curse. He looked again at the threat rating, 21, statistically negligible. What could one harmless applicant possibly change? The stamp came down. Vex Cora forgot the name within seconds. The system didn't. The Academy moon hung heavy above Prime, and metallic, rotating with the patience of something that had learned not to care who survived it. Commander Thrax stood on the landing platform with his arms crossed, watching transports arrive. This moment mattered. First impressions always did. Cadets either arrived knowing fear or learned it quickly. The strong ones learned fast. The platform filled with the expected shapes, war broods, fireborn giants, synthetic hybrids humming with restrained aggression. Each arrival reinforced the pattern Thrax trusted, violence refined, weakness filtered out. Then the final transport opened, and a human stepped onto the platform holding a travel mug. She paused, looked around, smiled. Not the smile of defiance, not arrogance, something lighter, curious. Thrax felt irritation rise before reason caught up. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but this one looked misplaced. No armor, no visible augmentation. A backpack decorated with symbols that meant nothing to him. She inhaled the air like it mattered. "Wow," she said softly, as if to herself. "This place has presence." Around her the platform shifted. Predators recalculated distance. Fire dimmed. Even the Voidborn adjusted their fields, instinctively giving space. Thrax accessed the roster. Harrison Riley, human, threat rating 21. Impossible. He approached her, each step deliberate. "You are at a combat academy," he said. She looked up, eyes bright. "Yes, I know, well, sort of." That pause mattered. She spoke about curriculum, about synthesis, about metaphor, words that didn't belong here. She believed them. Thrax realized, slowly, painfully, that she had not misunderstood the danger. She had misunderstood the purpose. And by the time he understood that, protocol had already failed. The first trial was meant to exhaust. Gravity shifted, muscles tore, cadets collapsed and rose again because collapse was unacceptable. Riley Harrison ran like someone enjoying weather. She finished before the timers recalibrated, didn't collapse, didn't boast. She stretched, breathing evenly as if movement itself had been the point. Thrax watched from the observation deck, irritation turning into something else. Unease, maybe, or the first crack in an assumption he'd held too long. The The second exercise killed fear by drowning it. Lasers, crushers, patterns meant to overwhelm cognition. Riley slowed down. Not hesitation, observation. She moved with patience, body finding space where others forced speed. Her breathing stayed steady. She smiled once softly, like someone recognizing a familiar shape in chaos. Instructors began checking equipment. By the third exercise, cadets were watching her instead of the instructors. Not admiration, something closer to. Riley, meanwhile, felt something else growing beneath her enthusiasm. A faint wrongness, a sense that the stakes were heavier than she'd thought, that the smiles she received were edged with calculation. She dismissed it. Doubt had never been useful to her. Movement was. Still, she wondered why no one laughed. By the time toxin resistance began, the Academy no longer spoke openly. They documented. She breathed what others couldn't, not because she didn't feel discomfort, but because discomfort never frightened her. She treated it like information, temporary, interesting. Telepathic pressure slid off her thoughts, not blocked, simply redirected. Her mind did not resist fear, it reframed it. The instructors gathered at night, compared notes, tried to define what they were seeing without admitting what it implied. This wasn't training, it was exposure. And exposure revealed something deeply inconvenient. Riley didn't approach danger as threat or challenge. She approached it as material. That realization unsettled Thrax more than any broken record, because doctrine relied on fear, on urgency, on narrowing options until violence felt inevitable. Riley widened space. That made her dangerous in a way their metrics couldn't chart. And still she didn't know. The survival gauntlet was never meant for revelation. It was meant to end stories. Riley entered without ceremony, without understanding, without fear. Machines fell apart around her not because she fought harder, but because she listened to movement, patterns, feedback. The environmental shifts tested endurance. She adjusted rhythm. Then came the predator. They did not recognize her as prey. Neither did it recognize her as threat. Confusion stalled aggression. In that pause, something else happened, a connection not built on dominance but on acknowledgement. The observation deck went silent. Thrax felt a tightening in his chest he hadn't felt since his first campaign. Not fear, responsibility. This was no longer a mistake, it was a mirror. And it was showing them something they had avoided seeing. The office was quiet when the truth finally surfaced. Riley listened as they explained, listened as the words redefined her week, her actions, herself. Combat Academy. Weapons. Death. For the first time, doubt landed fully. Not fear of what she had done, fear of what she might have become without knowing. She laughed softly, because the alternative was heavier. When Thrax asked her to stay, it wasn't command, it was admission. She considered the question seriously, not ambition, not pride. Meaning. Could intention change what she already was? She stayed. The Academy changed with her, slowly, uneasily. Not because she conquered it. Because she exposed a flaw they could no longer ignore. Strength had never been about how hard you struck. Sometimes it was about how calmly you stepped forward, believing the world could be shaped rather than survived. And somewhere in an office far from the moon, a clerk checked his numbers more carefully than before, wondering how many other mistakes were waiting to teach him something he didn't yet know. There was a moment, just before the first alarm sounded, when Riley noticed how quiet everyone else had become. Not silence exactly. Machines still hummed, engines still breathed, but the living things, the ones with instincts sharpened by generations of survival, had shifted. Their bodies angled away from her, their movements slowed, cautious, like animals sensing an approaching storm they didn't yet understand. Riley mistook it for nerves. She adjusted the strap on her backpack, feeling the familiar weight settle between her shoulders. Grounding, reassuring. The mug in her hand was still warm. That mattered. Small comforts mattered when you were somewhere new. The platform stretched wide beneath her feet, metal by impacts, scorched by things she didn't have names for. She admired the texture. Brutalist, yes, but honest. No attempt to soften what it was. She liked places that didn't pretend. A towering figure began walking toward her. She noticed the way the ground subtly responded to each step, the vibration traveling up through her shoes. Structural resonance. Interesting. Whoever engineered this platform had anticipated mass far beyond human norms. She looked up, smiling before she realized she was doing it. Oh, hi. The being stopped several meters away. Smart distance, she thought absently. Good design choice. He was enormous, all armored angles and dense presence like violence rendered architectural. His face, if it could be called that, didn't move much, but something about his stillness suggested calculation rather than threat. "You are Riley Harrison," he said. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "That's me," she replied. "You must be faculty." A pause, long enough to register. "I am the commander of this academy." Her smile widened just a little. That explains the vibe. She didn't notice the way several cadets took another step back. Didn't notice the flames dimming or the synchronized ripple through the brood. Her attention had already shifted to the towers rising behind him, the way light caught their edges. "Is all of this original construction?" she asked, gesturing. "Or did you adapt an older base? Because the layering feels intentional." The commander did not answer immediately. He was looking at her hands, unarmed, relaxed, fingers marked faintly with old calluses, the kind earned slowly through repetition rather than impact. He had seen those hands before on engineers, on medics, never here. "This is a military institution," he said finally. "Right," Riley said easily. "Interdisciplinary, though, I could tell from the brochure." That was the second pause, longer. Somewhere in the commander's mind, a process began to grind. Old instincts built for threat recognition struggled to categorize her. She wasn't lying. That much was clear. She believed every word she was saying. That belief unsettled him more than deception ever could. Orientation began without ceremony. They moved into the training grounds, vast and open, the air sharper here, filtered but thin. Riley fell into step beside a cluster of cadets who looked like they had been designed rather than born. Limbs reinforced, eyes modified, bodies shaped around combat as purpose. They did not speak to her. She didn't push. Silence was fine. Silence left room to observe. The first exercise was announced with clinical efficiency. Distance, variable gravity, environmental instability. Riley's attention sharpened. "Oh," she murmured, almost pleased. The run began. At first, she paced herself carefully, feeling out the gravity shifts, the timing between lightness and weight. It reminded her of childhood, of running along uneven coastlines where the ground dipped and rose without warning. Your body learned before your mind caught up. She noticed the others were struggling, not failing exactly, but fighting the terrain instead of moving with it. Muscles tensed where they should have released, breath held when it should have flowed. She adjusted. Not faster, smoother. By the halfway point, she realized something was wrong. She wasn't tired. That wasn't unusual for her, but the distance markers suggested she should be. The gravity spikes were higher than anything she'd trained under back home. She felt them. Her joints registered the strain, but it stayed contained, like a note held just below discomfort. She crossed the finish line to a strange reception. Instructors stared at displays. Cadets stared at her. No one cheered, no one spoke. She rolled her shoulders, stretched her calves. "That was really well designed," she said, aiming the comment at no one in particular. The unpredictability forces presence. You can't dissociate. An instructor blinked slowly. You finished early. Oh, she glanced back down the course. Others were still running, some limping. I can wait if you need. The instructor didn't answer. The second exercise followed too quickly for conversation to settle. Enclosed space, moving hazards, light that cut rather than illuminated. Riley paused at the threshold, her curiosity overriding caution. The lasers formed shifting planes, intersecting at angles that created momentary volumes of safety before collapsing again. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Then she stepped inside. Her movements weren't efficient in the way combat training defined it. There was no aggression, no dominance. She treated the space like a partner, responding rather than anticipating, letting the patterns reveal themselves. She felt the near misses. Heat grazed her skin. Air displaced violently where she had been moments before. Her heart rate rose, but it didn't spike. The danger was real. She respected it. Respect, she had learned long ago, was not the same as fear. When she exited, unharmed, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. This was more than metaphor. She looked back at the room, at the scorch marks and embedded debris, at the way the door sealed itself behind her like a jaw closing. For the first time, a quiet question surfaced. Had she misunderstood the scale? The instructors didn't offer feedback. They moved on. Weapons came next. Riley accepted the plasma cutter with interest, feeling its weight, its balance. Tools were tools. Purpose came from intention. She mimicked the stance shown, but her eyes followed the energy flow rather than the target. When she cut, she wasn't thinking about damage. She was thinking about line. The result unsettled everyone except her. When the armored dummy fell apart into something strangely composed, she stepped back, frowning slightly. "I might have overworked it," she said. "Sorry." No one answered. By the end of the day, exhaustion finally found her, not in her body but somewhere quieter. A subtle emotional fatigue, being watched without understanding why, being evaluated without context. She lay on her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of systems built for war. She wondered briefly why an art academy needed so many medics. The thought drifted away before it could settle. Tomorrow, she told herself, would make things clearer. It always did. Sleep didn't come all at once. Riley lay still, eyes open, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of the academy at rest. Systems cycling, distant impacts echoing through reinforced corridors. Somewhere far below, something mechanical screamed briefly, then went quiet again. She cataloged the sounds the way she always did in new places. Pattern first, meaning later. Her body felt fine, better than fine. That more than anything else bothered her. She had learned to trust fatigue. Fatigue was honest. It told you when you had misjudged yourself. But tonight, exhaustion hovered just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. Eventually, she slept. She dreamed of corridors that rearranged themselves when she wasn't looking, of doors that opened inward no matter which way you pushed, of hands shaping light into something solid enough to hold. She woke before the lights shifted to cycle. The room was quiet, too quiet. For a moment she wondered if she had overslept and missed something important. That familiar anxiety rose, small, manageable, but it passed when she checked the time. Still early, still hers. She stretched, feeling muscles respond smoothly. No soreness, no stiffness. That was unusual. By the time she reached the training hall, the others were already there. They stood in loose formations, grouped by species, by shared instincts. Conversations were minimal. Eyes tracked her without meaning to. Riley smiled politely and chose a spot near the edge. The next instructor introduced himself without preamble. Psychological resistance training. She tilted her head, interested. This, at least, sounded familiar. The room was designed to disorient. Surfaces absorbed sound unevenly. Light bent in ways that made depth unreliable. The air carried a low-frequency hum that vibrated through bone rather than ear. Riley felt it immediately, a pressure behind her eyes, a subtle tightening in her chest. Good, she thought, challenge. The telepath entered her mind without warning. Fear, when projected properly, was meant to bypass reason. Images surfaced uninvited, falling, suffocating, loss without narrative, endings without closure. Riley didn't push them away. She watched. There was sadness there, loneliness, a deep, aching quiet that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with being unseen. Her throat tightened, not from fear but recognition. She breathed through it. Somewhere in the room, the telepath hesitated. Riley's thoughts wandered, not away from the images but around them. She wondered why certain colors felt heavier, why some memories carried sharper edges than others. She wondered if dread had a palate. When the session ended, she opened her eyes to find the instructor staring at her as if she had spoken aloud. "Was that sufficient?" Riley asked gently. "I think I might need more time with it. There were layers I didn't get to." The telepath did not answer. They moved on to endurance. Weighted vests, thermal shafts, vertical climbs designed to punish hesitation. Riley accepted the vest, surprised by its mass. This one pulled at her center, demanded attention. She liked that. It forced alignment. Halfway up the shaft, she stopped. Not because she couldn't continue. Because something caught her eye. A crystalline formation jutted from the wall, half melted, half grown, its lattice fractured and reformed by repeated heat cycles. It reflected her in fractured rainbows. She reached out, steadying herself with one hand while she leaned closer. "Fascinating," she murmured. "You can see the stress history in the structure. It's like a record of adaptation." Below her, cadets climbed past without comment. Above her, instructors watched in disbelief. She stayed there longer than protocol allowed, long enough for concern to replace irritation. Then she resumed the climb. Finished early. Later, during toxin exposure, she began to feel it. Not pain, not panic. A kind of emotional thinning. Her vision softened at the edges. Colors bled into one another. Her thoughts slowed, not in confusion but in drift. She sketched between exposures, quick lines capturing posture, tension, the way different bodies responded to stress. She noticed that some cadets grew louder under strain. Others grew quiet. One trembled uncontrollably but refused to step away. She felt a small ache then, not for herself but for them. She wondered what it meant to design suffering as curriculum. The thought lingered longer than the toxins. By the end of the day, she was tired in a way that felt new, not physical depletion, something closer to moral friction, a sense that she was moving through a space with rules she didn't fully understand, and that her ignorance might be complicit. That night she didn't sketch. She sat on her bunk, hands resting loosely in her lap, staring at the floor. For the first time since arriving, she considered the possibility that this place was not metaphorical at all, that the danger was not symbolic, and that her ease within it might say something uncomfortable about her. She slept anyway. Morning came with escalation. Morning did not announce itself gently. The lights came up in stages, pale and clinical, like a question that refused to be ignored. Riley opened her eyes already awake, her body anticipating movement before thought had time to catch up. She sat up slowly. Something had shifted, not in the room, in her. The quiet doubt from the night before hadn't left. It had settled, become weight, manageable but present. She dressed without humming. In the corridor, cadets moved with more urgency than before. Fewer glances, more distance. The air carried a tension that hadn't been there yesterday, stretched thin and vibrating like a held breath across too many lungs. No one explained the change. They didn't need to. The briefing was short, too short. Advanced scenario integration. No introductory framing, no reassuring abstractions. Riley felt it then, a faint tightening beneath her ribs. Not fear, anticipation edged with caution, the kind that usually preceded moments where choice mattered. They descended. The lower levels of the academy were older, less polished. Walls bore scars that hadn't been repaired because they served as reminders. This was where lessons stopped pretending to be survivable. Riley noticed the way instructors watched her now, not irritation, not disbelief. Evaluation. The first engagement began without warning. Automated units dropped from concealed hatches, weapons already charged. No announcement, no countdown. Riley moved. Not reflexively, intentionally. She felt the shift immediately. Yesterday she had danced through danger because she thought it was structured, designed, contained. This was not that. These machines were trying to end her. The realization landed cleanly. No panic, just clarity. Her breath deepened, her focus narrowed. She stepped aside as plasma cut the space she had occupied, heat washing over her skin. She redirected momentum, borrowed force instead of opposing it. Her body responded with a familiarity that unsettled her even as it saved her. When it was over, she stood among dismantled parts, chest rising and falling faster than before. She did not smile. Around her the other cadets struggled. Some adapted, some didn't. The academy did not slow for them. Between exercises, Riley felt something like guilt brush past her thoughts, a quiet question she didn't want to phrase fully. Why was this easier for her? The next phase layered environments over opposition, heat, cold, pressure, absence. She adjusted, again, always again. But the effort was increasing now, not physically, ethically. Each solution carried consequences she couldn't unsee. Redirecting force meant something else absorbed it. Surviving meant others failed. She caught herself hesitating once, just once. A half-second delay that earned her a glancing blow, energy tearing fabric, grazing skin. Pain flared sharp and real, cutting through her composure. She welcomed it more than she should have. Pain anchored her, reminded her this was not art. By the time they reached the central arena, she was breathing hard. The instructors exchanged glances. This was the point of no return. The creature emerged from below with a sound that vibrated through the floor, through bone, through instinct. Muscle and hunger and design, stripped of anything unnecessary to kill. Riley froze. Not in fear. In recognition. She felt the familiar pull, the urge to understand rather than dominate, to name instead of conquer. But this time, understanding carried risk. She stepped forward anyway. The creature charged. She moved just enough, close enough to feel heat and breath and intention. She touched its flank without thinking, fingers brushing living mass, and felt the tension there. The readiness, the exhaustion beneath the aggression. Her heart pounded now, not from exertion, from choice. She lowered herself deliberately, making herself smaller without making herself weak, held the creature's gaze, let it see her. Around them, systems waited for escalation. Riley reached into her pocket, hands shaking just slightly, and offered food with an openness that felt almost foolish. The pause stretched. The academy held its breath. When the creature accepted, something in Riley loosened and something else tightened. Relief, yes, but also understanding. She sat there afterward, the predator beside her, feeling the weight of what she had done settle in. This wasn't reinterpretation. This was intervention. When the exercise was finally terminated, Riley stood slowly, legs unsteady for the first time since arrival. She looked up at the cameras, at the unseen observers. Her voice when it came was quiet, earnest. "So," she said, "can someone explain to me what this is actually for?" No one answered. But for the first time, they knew they would have to. The room they brought her to afterward was smaller than she expected. No observation glass, no dramatic lighting, just clean lines, muted tones, and a chair placed deliberately in the center, as if someone had considered where a human might feel least defensive. Riley noticed that detail immediately. She sat when asked, not because she was told, but because she was tired enough now to welcome stillness. The adrenaline was draining, leaving behind a quiet tremor in her hands she didn't bother hiding. Commander Thrax entered without ceremony. Up close, he was even larger than she remembered, not just in mass but in presence, the kind of presence that came from long familiarity with consequence. He didn't sit at first. He studied her, the way one studies a problem that refuses to resolve cleanly. "You were never meant to be there," he said. Riley nodded. "I figured that out." No defensiveness, no accusation, just acknowledgement. She glanced down at her sleeve where the fabric had been burned through, skin beneath still tender. The pain was dull now, persistent, real. "That thing in the arena," she said carefully. "It wasn't a metaphor, was it?" "No." Another pause. "And the others," she continued, "the ones who didn't finish, what happens to them?" "They survive," Thrax said. Then after a moment, "most of the time." That answer stayed between them, heavy and unfinished. Riley leaned back slightly, exhaling. The room felt different now that she knew, smaller, sharper, the walls no longer abstract. "I need to understand something," she said. "Have I been passing tests or causing damage?" Thrax considered her question, longer than protocol required. "You have been doing exactly what you were designed to do," he said finally. She frowned. "I wasn't designed for this." "No," he agreed, "you were." That was the first thing he said that unsettled her more than comforted. He activated the display. Numbers filled the air between them. Metrics, comparisons, lines climbing where none should, her name anchored them all. Riley looked, but without pride. Data had never impressed her. Context mattered more. "These results," Thrax said, "are not possible within our current models." "That sounds like a system problem," she replied quietly. A faint tightening at the edge of his jaw. Not anger, recognition. "You approached lethal scenarios without framing them as lethal," he said. "You adapted not by escalation, but by reframing. You treated threats as variables rather than enemies." She swallowed. "I didn't know people could get hurt." "You know now." "Yes." That word landed heavier than anything else she'd said. Riley closed her eyes briefly. Images surfaced, cadets struggling, the weight of the vest, the look in the creature's eyes before it chose not to kill her. "I don't want to be good at something that exists only to break people," she said. Thrax watched her carefully. This was the moment where most cadets argued, or justified, or hardened. She didn't. "You think this place exists to break them," he said. She opened her eyes. "Doesn't it?" Silence answered first. "Then it exists because the galaxy is not kind," Thrax said, "and because refusing to prepare does not prevent violence, it only relocates it." Riley absorbed that slowly, let it settle without immediate resistance. "Preparation," she said, "doesn't have to mean erasure." Something flickered then, not in the lights, in him. "You were accepted here by mistake," Thrax said. "A clerical error. You were meant for a different institution entirely." She nodded again. "That tracks." "We can correct it," he continued. "Today, you would leave with full clearance, compensation, and no obligation to remain silent." Her shoulders loosened slightly at that, relief sharp and tempting. She imagined leaving, Real classrooms, studios, spaces where harm was symbolic again. Then she imagined the arena without her. The creature, the cadets, the system unchanged. She felt the familiar pull return, the one that had guided her all her life into uncomfortable rooms where something needed rethinking. "What happens if I stay?" she asked. Thrax didn't answer immediately. "You would train knowingly," he said at last, "with intent. You would be held to the same standards. You would no longer be protected by misunderstanding. And if I refuse to become what this place usually makes, then you will force us to decide whether we can afford to change." Riley smiled faintly, not with delight, with resolve. "That sounds exhausting," she said. "Yes," Thrax replied, "it is." She looked down at her hands again. They were steady now. "Can I ask one more thing?" she said. "You may." "The creature," she said, "what happens to it?" Thrax hesitated just enough. "Until now," he said, "it has been a weapon." Riley met his gaze, held it. "And now?" "Now," he said slowly, "it is a question." She stood. Her legs protested, but she trusted them. "I don't know if I belong here," she said, "but I know what happens when systems don't get questioned." Thrax inclined his head, not quite a bow, something close. "Then you may stay," he said, "if you choose." Riley didn't answer right away. But she didn't leave. That, for the Academy, was answer enough. By the time the decision reached the rest of the Academy, it no longer felt like a decision at all. It felt like inertia changing direction. Riley stayed, but nothing snapped into place the way people expected it to. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no reframing speech about purpose or destiny. She returned to training the next day with the same backpack, the same quiet focus, but the air around her had shifted. Now she knew. That knowledge didn't make her stronger, it made her careful. She asked questions others didn't, not challenges, clarifications. Why this scenario ended where it did, what failure was meant to teach, who defined success. Some instructors bristled, others listened. A few began rewriting exercises late at night, adjusting parameters in ways they couldn't quite justify but couldn't ignore either. Riley trained hard, harder than before, because now restraint cost effort. She learned how much damage she could do if she stopped framing violence as material and started treating it as intent. The realization weighed on her. She carried it quietly, the way she carried everything else. The creature from the arena, no longer referred to by designation alone, was relocated. Observation status, enrichment protocols. Riley visited when she could, not to tame it, just to remind herself that power didn't have to erase what it touched. The other cadets adjusted in their own ways. Some avoided her, some watched. A few trained beside her cautiously at first, then with growing trust. They learned that she didn't dominate space. She shared it. That sparring with her felt less like losing and more like discovering where you'd been rigid. She lost sometimes, intentionally or not. She learned from that too. Commander Thrax kept his distance, not from mistrust. He had spent his life refining systems that assumed brutality was clarity. Riley didn't contradict that belief. She complicated it. Months passed. Records stopped being mentioned. Metrics still climbed, but no one celebrated them anymore. The Academy's reputation didn't soften, but it shifted. Graduates began returning with stories that didn't fit old categories. They survived not because they hit harder, because they saw more. On her final evaluation, Riley stood in a familiar room, hands relaxed at her sides. No weapons, no audience. Just a question. "What will you do with this training?" Thrax asked. She thought about it longer than protocol allowed. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I won't pretend it's neutral." That answer satisfied him more than any plan could have. When she left the Academy on her own terms this time, The moon didn't feel smaller. It felt unfinished, as if something there would keep unfolding without her. Far away in an administrative office that smelled faintly of recycled air and regret, Vex Cora approved another application. He checked the routing code twice, then again. He hesitated over the threat rating. Numbers, he had learned, were not the same as understanding. Riley Harrison's name appeared occasionally in briefings after that, not always attached to violence, often attached to prevention, redesign, mediation that worked because it refused to look like force. The Academy kept her acceptance letter framed, not as a warning, as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing a system can encounter is not a weapon. It's a person who walks into it by mistake, smiles without knowing why, and then chooses, once they finally understand, not to look away. And the galaxy adjusted, slowly, uneasily. But it did adjust.